So Jacob Hansen had seen my interview with James Lindsay, an expert on critical social justice and wokeness. And his response is, well, wouldn't any atheist naturally go down that line of wokeness? And my response is, well, there are a lot of them that do not. They're very libertarian and very rooted in the Enlightenment. But this is a very interesting discussion and gets to some of the heart of woke ideology and a belief in God. Now, before we get started, make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell so you receive notifications. And this interview is brought to you by Cardio Miracle. Cardio Miracle here is an amazing supplement. It's something I take every day. It has changed my lab work, the actual lab work. Go to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com, scroll down to the bottom, click on a video where I talk about my real life experience, and you can find out more about the science behind Cardio Miracle. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Matson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Jacob Hansen to talk about a recent interview that I did with James Lindsay. He wants to talk about, believe it or not, atheism and critical social justice. So, Jacob, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Great. So you had watched the interview that I did, I think it was last week or the week before, and had contacted me and said, well, wait a minute here. James is an atheist. Why does he fight against wokeism and critical social justice? And I started to think about that because there are a lot of philosophical underpinnings that would say, well, wait a minute, these things kind of are combined. But I think you had really thought about this, and I wanted you to be able to talk about it here on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I'm a huge James Lindsay fan. I have been for a long time. In fact, I feel like I might have liked James Lindsay before it was cool. I didn't just read his book, Cynical Theories. I have right here, How to Have Impossible Conversations, his book that he did with Peter Boghossian. So I've been a big James Lindsay fan for a long time and love what he does. However, actually, this goes back a few years, kind of when the woke stuff was starting to come about. I was kind of frustrated because I saw it coming out and I saw these different ideas. I started studying what the roots of it was. And one of the things that I found was that I wanted to do a steel man of it. Like I wanted to engage with it on its strongest terms. And so I actually I have it posted on my website, or I don't know if I have it on this website. It might have been an old website, but I had it posted where I did a steel man of kind of the critical social justice worldview. And I came away from it, honestly, kind of like, wow, this is actually pretty compelling stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had to, and it may sound strange, people know me as kind of like one of the most anti-woke people around, but I was shocked at how strong it was. And so what I wanted to do today was kind of review some of the stuff that James said and then push back on it from sort of a woke worldview. Because I think he does a very good job of explaining where this stuff came from and why it's connected to Marx and why it's religious in nature. But I don't know that James provides the strongest rebuttal of it. And so I kind of want to push back on him. And then I want to see how you kind of, Greg, what your thoughts are on a few of these. So I have some clips we could go through and do that. So does that work for you?
Let's rock and roll. I think this will be fun. Cool.
Well, if you want to put on the screen this clip that I have ready to go for the viewers, you and him were talking about sort of the origins of the Marxist ideology, back into Hegel, back into Rousseau, all of that kind of stuff. And you guys are talking about it, and James is doing an excellent job of kind of explaining the roots of this. And so I want to play this clip here and then discuss it a little bit.
You don't go out on the football field and get a coach one day and tomorrow you're a football player. You're always becoming a football player by the act of playing football. And so
And let me just actually preface one other thing. So what they're talking about here is about, in this philosophy, it's a very totalizing worldview philosophy that's talking about the nature of what we are as human beings, right? Kind of a religious worldview. And he's talking specifically here about this idea of of what human beings are becoming over time, right? And sort of what that looks like from sort of what the Marxist kind of view of human beings and human progress, kind of what that looks like. So I should have given that before, but we'll continue.
The coach is guiding you to get better at it. So there's these two kinds of things. And he says that human beings actually have both of these. They don't just build things and bring things into being. They also do so starting from their imagination, but they also are continually building not just houses and homes, but they're also building society. And through building society, we're building ourselves. We are, in fact, our own creator. He casts down God out of the story. He says the creator of man is man. Man builds a society around himself. That society socializes the next generation and even the current generation into modes of behavior and activity and being that make you who you are. And so man is creating man in this kind of endless circle of creation.
Okay. So when I heard him talk about that man creates man, I wanted to ask, and I'll ask you this, Greg. Okay, but doesn't man create man? If there is no God, okay, if we like James is not a Christian. In fact, he's a pretty well-known atheist. And a lot of these sort of secular atheist types, I wonder, well, isn't man ultimately the creator of man? Aren't we the product of our nature and nurture?
I've got your assumption and your premise in place to begin with. So you're talking about atheist. You're giving an example of, hey, you're kind of talking to James here and saying, hey, wait a minute. If you're an atheist, don't you believe that man creates man?
Yeah. I mean, what's the alternative?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, you could say biology, but wouldn't we all agree that human beings are a product of nature and nurture? Isn't that kind of and nature you can't really do much about, but the part that we can do, that we can control is how we're socialized. And ultimately that's sort of in our control.
Yeah, I would say there's a third element there. There's nature, nurture, and agency. So there is nurturing, and that would be my environment, my socialization. But then ultimately, even though that can be reduced at times, ultimately it's agency. And I think that ultimately agency has to win out on that. So just clear on that. But if you're an atheist and you're saying, well, wait a minute, doesn't man just create man? I think I think your point is extremely valid. Absolutely.
And I would say that it's inescapable because an atheist that believes, like an atheist materialist, right? Fundamentally, what I am is I am a biological machine. And biology is the product of chemistry. Chemistry is the product of physics, and physics is governed by deterministic laws, right? So I am just the product of natural forces, and I don't have agency. And so one of the big problems that you run into when you get rid of the notion of agency is that human beings, in fact, socialization goes out the window altogether. Because you are just the product of biology. You get into kind of a social Darwinian worldview. So again, I'm looking at this and I'm going, if we're going to grant that man has agency, but we grant that there is no God, well, then man creates man, and the world is what we make of it.
Absolutely. So if you're an atheist, that's what it is, right? It's Übermensch. It is the overman. It is the man God. And in a sense, that is a very good point, because if you go through 19th century, which he mostly talks about, 19th century philosophy, and you go through that continental, very German line of philosophy, and you go back to Hegel and come up through all the way up through Marx and Nietzsche and beyond, it is all about the new man. And that is used in 20th century Marxism. The whole idea of the new man is used in 20th century Marxism. And yet, as an atheist, what else would you put forward? I mean, if there's no God, who's gonna try and improve ourselves? And of course, you could always ask why. What is the whole purpose to improve yourself anyway? But sure, it is Übermensch, no question.
And there is ultimately the highest power in the universe. And is man the ultimate power in the universe? If there is no God, then yes, then then we're the next in line. We're the highest, most developed creature out there. Human beings are God. And then there's another problem that you run into. Because is it the individual who's God? Am I God? Or is the collective, are human beings writ large, the thing that occupies the throne?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's kind of two different ways you can go if you're going to be an atheist, because something's still going to occupy the highest position of power. The ultimate power in the universe is either you as the individual, you're the locus of everything, or human society is. Okay? Now, the Marxists, they embrace a view, not that the individual is the highest, but that society is the highest, right? That's the ultimate power. Okay? So it's interesting though, because he goes in to talk a little bit about this, that ultimately it's all pretend, right? And I want to go a little bit into that, because I think it's important to understand that when there is no transcendent truth, when everything is a social construction, then what it all is like you can read Yuval Harari's book, talks all about myth, right? And he says basically that we create myth, like money. It doesn't actually like exist. It's a myth. It's a social construct that human beings have created. And there's all sorts of things like that. And you start getting deep into this social constructionism or constructivism, where everything is a social construct, which is another way of saying it's all just pretend. He talks about in here about how Judith Butler, in his interview with you, said, drag is life and life is drag. In other words, it's all just, you're just putting on makeup and we're all just playing this game that we've sort of invented ourselves. And it doesn't have to be this way. And anyway, if we want to real quickly pull up this other clip real fast, I want to go into where he starts to talk about sort of this pretend world.
Academia.
So I'll just loop that back to what we were just saying. What did Judith Butler say was the answer to the problem of entrenched power in society? She called it the politics of parody. In other words, you have people literally, all they're doing is performing president of Harvard. Claudine Gay was performing. She's an actor. This is why so many of the activists are theater kids. This is why this is why we have politicians who are literally just actors, who are showing up and playing the role of a politician, but actually with their hands on the levers of power instead of, on a big screen in a movie.
They're posers.
They are. That's exactly right. But the entire philosophy is designed through doing that. The entire worldview, to the degree you accept it, believes that's all that's ever happening anyway. They literally believe that everything is constantly brainwashing through socialization. So they get to brainwash. Everything is just performance. So they can just go do, a highly scripted fake performance of the same thing. And so if AOC is acting, then she's doing a great performance. It's changing the world. And everything is always some fake, pastiche, artificial thing. So they can step in and they have every right to come in and do some fake, artificial, pastiche thing, but with the values that they want to project into it, put at the center, which makes them intrinsically good. Nobody's doing anything of any value, by the way, in their worldview. Everybody's doing fake stuff. It's just whether or not you see the vision for the future or you don't, as to whether or not your fake stuff is good or bad. So,
okay. So here's what I would ask James. Are you just performing, James? Or is there some sort of a transcendent truth? Is the world our social constructs that we create as a society? Or are you positing some sort of a transcendent truth that you have real knowledge of and that they're the pretenders? Because either they're the pretenders or you're the pretenders, or we're all pretenders, right? And we're all just making up our own values.
Yeah, I would say this. I understand where you're going with that. I don't think I would agree with it, because I do think that because what we're really talking about ultimately is identity. And so when you can see this whole woke movement, which is trying to strip down, destroy all identity. So whether you're a man or you're a woman, they do push up race, but it's trying to completely confuse who you are. And so I can say, well, Judith Butler, for example, I can go and be a woman and act like a woman and perform like a woman, and therefore I am a woman because being a man is only a social construct. So there are underlying truths and there are underlying orders in place that wokeness takes you beyond. It says, no, throw off those orders, throw off those truths, and you can be this even though you're not. And that's what I think he's saying, right? It's not just a matter of saying we're all performing. I mean, I understand you can say that to a certain degree, but I think that what he's saying is that wokeness takes you beyond any kind of truth that exists. With or without.
And I to a certain degree agree with them if you're going to go down this rabbit hole, because what am I, Greg? You say I'm a man. That's a category that's been created by human beings. There's nothing intrinsic about you are a man.
Sure. There are biological truths about you being a man that can be observed and proven.
I would say this, but that categorization itself is a social construct. We created the lines about where the line is between a man and a woman.
No, we didn't. We created the language. We didn't create the category. We didn't create the lines between the two, right? The X and Y chromosomes as compared to the XX chromosome, we didn't create that division, that change.
You're right. But
right. So that already exists. What we created was the language. And now you're taking us into postmodernism here.
Good, which is where I want to go.
would say, yeah, man and woman is just a symbol. The wording is just a symbol, and we can infect and change what those words are and then make them mean something completely different, as if, again, I go back to my point, as if, again, by changing the language and what culture thinks is the meaning, that we actually change truth, because everything's a social construct, as you said. So I think I know what you're saying, but there are absolute truths that we know that critical social justice, wokeness, postmodernism, in many ways, tries to say, no, none of that is real. There is no objective truth whatsoever. So it's just your truth, my truth. We're all our authentic selves. And X, Y chromosomes don't mean anything, period. The problem is, again, and I always want to ask somebody this, is, okay, if I'm not a man, because there's two levels, right? They always want to break this down, whether it's identity or truth. It's saying, okay, well, let's not say there's a breakdown in sexes yet. We'll say there's a breakdown in gender, and this is the higher level up here. So we're gonna pull apart gender and sex, because they have always meant the same thing, always. Even in the 90s when the Family Proclamation was written, right? And so we'll pull gender up and pull this apart little by little, right? And we'll say gender is different. Gender is your performance. Gender is what you act. Gender is the social construct, but we'll keep sex in place. So there is a male and a female, but man and women will be assigned to the gender. But of course, if you say that to someone today and you say, okay, so a trans woman is a male, right? They're going to have a very hard time with you, because ultimately the goal is to break it all down. I think gender's not enough. They've got to break the sex down also. So
and fair enough. I can see what you're saying there. There are areas like for biology and stuff where you can say this is not that. Now, a hardcore postmodernist would go down the route of saying even the categorizations that you make around the biological realities that we see are ultimately chosen categorizations.
Sure.
And you can choose to categorize things in ways to structure power to your advantage.
Right. But again, that is absolutely true. And that's happening and working very well today. But ultimately they're wrong, right? They're completely wrong. They're right in the fact that you can take language and change its meaning. They're wrong in saying that the underlying order, which I would call an order of God, the underlying truths, objective truths, can be changed because you're changing those meanings. They can't change, because the question is, if you take away male and female, then I still have to ask you, okay, what are we going to call? What's the word for someone with XY chromosomes? What is that called then? If we're going to take man or male out of it, what is someone with, because that's something. What do we call an XY chromosome?
A human
person?
We'd call it a human being.
But it's different from other human beings that are XX.
But yeah, I could say, well then, but aren't you different then? But we could continue to break this down. You know, what do we call a human being who has blonde hair, blue eyes, and XY chromosome? Am I something different from a human being that, like you, have XY chromosomes, but you have different color hair and eyes, right?
The answer is yes.
We can divide
there are
these things endlessly.
There are differences though. Right. And those are truths. And so the social construction portion of, which is really part of critical theory and postmodernism, is a matter of what all it is. All this ever works for is what the whole line of liberation. It is, if you go back all the way to Kant, another German philosopher before Hegel, and he starts talking about critiquing. And critique in German at that time didn't mean like analysis, like we talk about critical thinking. It meant an attack or on something, to break it down, not to analyze, but to break it down, to change it. That's what critique means. And that word gets carried on through Hegel and up into Marx and up into critical theory with the Frankfurt School, into critical race theory. It's a matter of breaking it down. So that loosening of meaning, that loosening of symbolism, the whole idea of social construct, all it's for is to break it down. Once you break it down, then you can replace it with something firm.
But here's my thing. I want to put on my critical social justice. There are things that should be broken down. If the power structures of the world are not the way that I want them as an atheist, if I think that they're unjust, and by unjust, I don't mean by a standard of justice that is objective, that all people are accountable to, but literally to what I think the way things should be, then it makes sense that I would want to use language and categorization to restructure power according to what I want. And if what I want is a world in which gender is seen as fluid, if it's a world where where all of these things that have given white men an advantage, and I want to restructure power so that power gets shared more equitably, why is that a problem? Isn't this a noble goal?
Politics.
But what I'm saying is that we have to give the devil his due.
Sure. No, I agree. Absolutely. I know what you're saying. I would say that most atheists, and you can argue and say, but why? Right. But I would argue that most atheists have a morality of the golden rule. It is entrenched in them. And does that come from Christianity? Probably. It probably comes from Christianity. But they're going to say, because a lot of them are going to have that libertarian approach, which says, hey, I can go along with anything. You go be you, do what you want, but it can't hurt anybody else.
But
right?
See, this is the thing. Actually, let's actually go to this next clip. I think it's a good segue.
And that goes, by the way, that goes to the enlightenment value of the individual, which I would say was superseded by or was initiated before a lot more by Christianity than by the Enlightenment. It's what the Enlightenment carried over from Christianity.
Now, here's one thing though I want to push back on. Remember, if you get rid of sort of that there is a transcendent order to things, right? Then what's left is just what you want. Absolutely. I always say you can boil down the world to two things: preference and power. Preference is what you want, and power is your ability to get it, right? Now, from an individualist point of view, there's sort of see what the people who have this sort of mindset want is that they want a world of equity. They want a world where everyone has sort of, they're putting forth sort of a radical humanist idea. This is the way I see it. This is a radical form of humanism. And what it says is, if humans are ultimately the center of the universe, the highest thing we can do for human beings is to give them power to get what they prefer, right? As much as we possibly can. I think that is the end goal of the woke worldview. I think it's kind of like, well, what higher vision is there of the world than that people get the chance to have what they want, to get what they prefer. And if you prefer to go out and dress like a woman and all of that, you shouldn't be forced, or you shouldn't be, I wouldn't even say forced, you shouldn't have people looking sideways at you, judging you for that, right? You should
I would say I have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of that feeling.
Well, let's actually go to this clip real fast. I want to talk about liberation versus liberty real quick. So if you want to pull this back up.
That's a big focus of what I talk about. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a very important distinction. Let's listen to this.
We kind of added our American mix to it, and now we're giving it back.
Yeah.
And so a dominant voice now at the UN is this intersectionality, but it's this religion, as you talk about, Marx focusing on the individual really and society. You get the ideas of the new man, right, and the new woman. This transformation that, to me anyway, and tell me what you think on this. There's a difference between, for example, liberty and liberation.
Yes.
Right? This idea of liberation becomes what you're speaking of from Rousseau, Hegel, and moving forward. And this idea that we're going to throw off the shackles of society. We're going to throw these shackles off. The problem with that is that the problem is always out there.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is the system, systemic racism. The problem is, of course, focused on the West, is democracy and capitalism. But then compared to, say, for example, Christianity, where you have to say, well, I'm a problem. I have to change. I need personal responsibility to take hold of my free will and be something or become something. It's almost a perversion of that.
Yeah.
With social justice that says, yeah, you need to become something. You need to throw off the shackles of society, not I need to throw off the shackles of my mistakes, of my errors. Does that make sense?
Okay. So here are my thoughts on that. If you were born in Afghanistan, Greg, you'd have a very, very different worldview. In other words, and I'm going to use this from sort of I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit. So what really shapes you isn't your choices so much. Your choices they actually exist within a very tight environment that you were brought up in that even gives you the ideas of what are out there. And so we don't have a ton of judgment for someone in Afghanistan acting certain ways because that's just the culture that they grew up in, right? That's just what they were socialized into. And so if everyone is being socialized into these different systems, then ultimately what we need to do is we need to change the systems themselves, because what makes man? That's the real question that James is asking. And we're sort of like, acting like, no, society makes man, especially if you have an atheist worldview. So we have an obligation to throw off the shackles of these societies that oppress people, right? And so if I think, according to my own sort of subjective view of the world, that it is oppressive for people to be restrained in their sexuality, well, then I'm going to fight to free them from the oppressive shackles of the society that they're in, just like you would want to free people from oppressive structures that are out there from your point of view, right? So it's just a battle of power, and this critical theory is extremely effective at breaking down structures that stop people from doing whatever they want.
Sure. So a couple points here. Again, I don't know where you're talking as an atheist and from an atheist point of view and a devil's advocate, or where you're actually, is that all devil's advocate?
Pretty much.
Okay. So here's what I would say in response to that. I think you're right. Number one, it's extremely effective. I mean, we're watching it today. It is incredibly effective. But the problem
is that again, you even though you're saying you're going to the individual, as I said in that clip, you're not starting with the individual. And that's the difference, for example, between the gospel and an understanding of Christianity and choice and agency and atheism, is that, okay, if I go and I just say, well, everyone's just a product of their environment and a product of their biology, period, then all I need to do is work on their biology and work on the systems, right? And so I can change that. But if I believe,
so you can see though that if you're an atheist,
no question, absolutely, that's exactly where you would go. I mean, why not? Right? Again, the difference is Western atheists. The difference, you're right in that if you keep going down the rabbit hole, that's where an atheist should be. Right. But Western atheists, most of them are built on the Enlightenment, where they have actually, whether they want to agree to it or not, and I think a lot more are starting to understand that their atheism, their Enlightenment anchor is built on Christianity. Because I mean, look at Douglas Murray.
I have a clip. I have a clip for this exact part. I want to segue into this just because you are saying exactly what James says. And it was funny for me to hear him say it because I was like, James, and some people don't know this. James was kind of part of the new atheist sort of movement. So to hear him say some of this stuff, you guys, this is a big deal for him to say what he says here. It's 47 minutes. Let's see here. 47:39 is where I want to start. Let me pull this up real quick.
Believe.
No, it's interesting when you bring that up, because this has caused a watershed moment for demographics politically, because you have those, therefore, that will not fall into that idea, that have been on the left typically. So you've got classical liberals, people that are really, they hold the Enlightenment as an anchor, right? And science as an anchor. And
my brothers, by the way, fall into this exact category as atheists who are also strong sort of libertarian types. Anyway, we'll continue.
So you've got a Jonathan Haidt and a Steven Pinker and others that even a Bill Maher, right? That are all of a sudden going, what in the world? This is not what I had signed up for.
Yeah,
I still hold on to these other truths, this science and what is produced from the Enlightenment. And so there's this shift. In a sense, of course, Trump pushes that also the other way, but it's this shift in demographically where you have even someone like yourself. All of a sudden, I see you working with a number of evangelicals, and because you're on the same page with a number of these things, whereas before it would have been completely on the opposite side of the gulf.
Right. Yeah. So the dividing line, and I find myself saying this more and more often. I was actually I think I was in a public conversation with Charlie Kirk at one point, and he put me to the test and said, what's going on? And somehow I came out of my mouth that the dividing line, the real dividing line here, to put it theologically, and then I'll kind of put it in simpler terms afterwards, but to put it theologically is the line is people who know that they're not God versus people who think that they might be.
Oh, he said it. He said it. That's exactly the difference. The difference is that some people recognize that they're not God, and other people kind of think that, well, they take the logic to its conclusion that, well, if there's no God, what's the next highest thing? And the next greatest power, and I would say that this is a very powerful argument. The next highest thing isn't you as the individual. The next highest power is society. Because you're subject to the society, like we just talked about, if you were born in Afghanistan, you're subject to that society and the way that it's going to form. And so the greatest minds,
in their minds and the way they teach it, that's right.
Exactly. But I think that this is the thing. We tend to think, oh man, these people are crazy. But I'm saying, no. If you get rid of God, and that it changes the power balance, the power dynamics, to use their words, of reality. You and I, Greg, operate from the position that there is a power in the universe greater than human societies. They don't, because what is more powerful than human society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The funny thing is that they won't tell you that. They'll speak that way and they'll talk that way in many cases about their solutions because they know they've got to go to the society, they've got to go to the collective, they've got to go to the systems and change those. Therefore, they can socially construct you, right? That's the approach. But what they actually do in terms of recruiting and activism toward individuals, kind of their missionary work, so to speak, is about the individual, right? It's you can be you, and you can be accepted and tolerated, and all things are good, and you can do whatever you want, and everything's fine. And that's always been the approach. And for example, you get this with there's a certain line I've got. What's his name? Carl Trueman, right? Carl Trueman, who I saw speak a couple of years ago. A Christian. Carl. He talks a lot about expressive individualism, and that's the problem. Is this idea of you can do anything? It's a postmodern approach, kind of, and before him there is oh boy, I'm going to forget his name. He's a Canadian philosopher where Truman's pulling from, and then today you've got Jeffrey Thane in the church that pulls a lot from this and does a lot of great work on this. Really good work.
Fantastic.
Really like Jeffrey Thane. The problem, though, what is not brought up in that line of thinking is the collective, because what really is happening here, expressive individualism, is simply a carrot to bring you into a collective. Expressive individualism isn't the problem, right? Because expressive individualism says you can be anything you want, but in the end, what they really are doing is they're recruiting you to be exactly like themselves and to think exactly like themselves and to follow very strict rules, virtue signaling to say, this is exactly who you need to be. So expressive individualism is the carrot, but it's a lie. It's a complete lie. It is no, we want you to come in and be part of the hive, right? You need to be part of the hive with us and do what we do.
Well, I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. Okay. There is, first of all, I'm going to tell you what I think you hit perfectly. Okay. If God is not the highest power, then society is the next highest power. So society then takes the place of God, right? The social order is the highest power of the universe. And
the state.
The state. Okay. The state, society. No, but I even want to go beyond government power.
Okay.
Because I think that they talk about power in a way different than libertarians like you and I do. We tend to talk about power in terms of political power, like guys with guns who force you to obey the rules of a particular geographical area. They are talking about power in a sense that goes towards all power dynamics in any social system whatsoever, down to family, everything, right? And so what they're saying is that the social forces, both cultural, political, economic, everything, all of these social forces, this is the greatest power in the universe. And we want to, it is the de facto God. And that God should be a beneficent God, a good God. And for them, the highest good is to let people do whatever they want. Okay? Expressive individualism is the religion. So society's the God, expressive individualism is the religion, and anyone who deviates from that expressive individualist ideology is a heretic. And not only that, if you and we need to break down any power dynamics that stop people from being their authentic selves, whether those are economic, whether those are social, anything that holds you back from doing whatever you want that's the dichotomy that's the line between good and evil in this sort of religion. Okay. And ultimately, if I were an atheist, I'd have a very hard time telling someone why that is wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I'm gonna push back on you.
Good, do it.
I want you to. Look, I mean, the God might be society, but I think that the religion is too. And I think that the message is expressive individualism, but it's not the religion. For example, if I am going to be part of that religion and I say, the traditional family is by far the best option. That's my expressive individualism. That's how I'm expressing myself and my own beliefs and what I really want. I'm going to get hammered, right? I'm going to be booted out of the religion. And so it's not a matter of expressive individualism and being able to be whoever I want to be. It's not. They're not going to allow that. I mean, and you'll see that over and over again. People getting canceled constantly. You saw this in the 20th century with Trotskyism, for example. I mean,
but I think they're canceling you.
They were all booted out because they weren't quite exactly the way the Leninists started, and it's.
I think practically, I think you're right. But I think theoretically what they're saying is no, you can have your family, Greg. I'm trying to, again, give the best argument, what I think they would say to you. Say, no, Greg, you can have your family. What you can't do is go around shaming people who don't. And creating and creating a culture that says these people for some reason are less than and marginalizing people because they don't conform to you. You can do whatever you want, just don't marginalize other people and use your power against them. And I don't mean political power. I mean any kind of even looking sideways at them through your eyes and being judgmental. That is a form of oppression.
Yeah, but see, so I like looking at what is. And that can be even when I'm looking against gospel principles or anything else. I want to see what the fruits are. What are the fruits? So if I look at it today,
Marxists don't like to do that.
Yeah. So if I look at it today and I see exactly what happens when I go out and I talk about the family proclamation, or I'm talking about a traditional family being an ideal situation, it's not going to work for everybody. It didn't work for me, in when I was growing up, But it's the ideal situation. I am going to be shamed. I'm going to be pushed back. And it's all from the same group. It's from those that are part of that collective. It's from those that start off with the idea, oh, this is all just expressive individualism. But really, they're all part of a collective. And they're sitting on this one specific building up really high, pointing their fingers down is what's happening. And so if I look at what is and how it actually happens, and if I even look through how the same ideologies have worked in the past in actual societies that have been taken over by this, I don't see any room whatsoever for tolerance. In fact, this is exactly what Marcuse goes over. He says that the tolerance, we need to have a really high level of tolerance for the hard left, for the leftists, so they can go and do what they want. But you cannot give even a tiny bit of tolerance to the right. And that is exactly the way they act. Right? It is, you cannot have anything that is going to be against the woke ideology.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the inherent in this sort of conservatism is the conservation of oppressive structures that need to be dismantled. Now, I want to...
There's actually a little bit of truth to that, but...
And
sure.
I agree. I think that most of the devil's best work is done by mixing truth with lies, like he did to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? He says something that's true, but then something that isn't. Now, I want to put one other thing, though, for the atheist, right? We can say there's that great question. What makes man? What determines who you are, right? And we, as believers in agency, say, we do. You largely are the product of the way that you use your agency. Now, you're influenced by society, but ultimately we're all accountable to God, because with whatever light and knowledge we receive, we have the agency to respond to the influences that come at us. However, if you take that out of the equation, man is the product of biology and sociology, socialization and biology. Now, we talked a lot about the socialization part. Society is the great God. But there's another way you can look at this. You could be a hard materialist and say, if you're going to go that route, then your biology determines who you are. And you will be whatever your biology has made you. Okay? Mm-hmm. So these are really bleak pictures, because either once you take God and agency out, what you're left with is either you are a meat computer that is going to do what your meat programming has made you do. Okay. And if you got the wrong programming, and some people are programmed better than others to have better outcomes than others. This is social Darwinism.
I think there's some truth to that too.
You're right. We say that our socialization and our biology act on an agent, a person inside. but take away the agent. And if you're going to posit an agent, like, what are you positing? You're positing something transcendent,
Yes,
something divine.
above the biology.
You're right. And I'm sorry, like, atheists, is that where we're going now? Are you guys all going down this road to where you have to recognize that human beings have a soul? I don't think you talk about, they go back to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment becomes this like magical force where all truth came out of the
It is their worldview founding.
Yes. And the problem is they don't realize that the Enlightenment actually emerged from Judeo-Christian ideas. And it is very much founded on religious assumptions. Okay? These assumptions like that human beings actually have dignity and worth inherently, human rights. My biology doesn't give me rights. Does society give me rights? And a lot of them, like when I talk to my brothers about this stuff, they're like, well, yeah, society does. Like, we as a society come together and we decide, what rights people have. Who's God? Society. You mean that when the Nazis decided that the Jews no longer had rights, that means they no longer had rights because you get your rights from society? No, actually, the Enlightenment thinkers that founded our country, founded on even Thomas Jefferson, who everyone wants to put out there as a big atheist, he said all men are endowed by their creator. And he knew that he had to put something up that transcended man, because otherwise that makes man God. And you have no rights if there is no God. What you have are privileges that are granted to you by the God of this world, society and the state.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting because, and this isn't a truth, and I'm not a philosophical expert or anything. I've studied it quite a bit, but I'm not anywhere near an expert. And I know people who are, and I get to talk to them sometimes. But it's really interesting that you have at one point coming in the 18th century, the 1700s, really this entire thought process that starts coming through. And again, it's coming through Germany and Germany and German-speaking philosophy on the continent, on continental philosophy. It's not all continental philosophy, but it's a specific strain that is the most used and had the most energy and momentum. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you've got everything that behind what started to become a part of the American founding. And not all of it, but most of it was completely different. It was a different type of philosophy that started saying exactly what you're saying, that there are rights that are transcendent, above society, above man himself. And it's founded on this idea of religion and religious freedoms. I mean, think about just the concept of religious freedom. When you say you have you have religious liberty, you are saying immediately you have rights for something above individuals and above the state that you get to choose, right? That is not what's coming from continental philosophy at all. It's just the opposite of what comes from that side. And so you have these two strains that come in, the fruits of what you get on the other side that comes a lot through the Scottish Enlightenment. You get the United States and the founding of the United States coming through. And then you have on the other side this battle here that's going against what brings really a lot of the philosophical underpinnings of the founding of America that now are taking over today in America, where we had that. We're turning away from what built us into this society, and we're going to the other side. And one is built on that transcendency, God, religion, religious liberties, and the other side is built 100% on secularism and man.
Well, it was interesting. I watched the coronation of, I forget his name, the new king in England.
Charles.
Mm-hmm. And I was shocked at the symbolism in that ceremony. Obviously, there were connections to temple ceremony stuff, but what was really interesting, and I didn't realize this, was how very much the English tradition is rooted in the idea that it is God who is above the king. And that idea of something transcendent being above the king, because if there's nothing above the king, then the king is God. But if there's something which was the tradition in certain ancient traditions, right?
Mhm.
That the ruler essentially was God, or even in totalitarian states like North Korea, right? But when you have something above him, then he's accountable to it. There's something transcendent. And we have gotten rid of the world of the transcendent. And as we get rid of that world of the transcendent, what we're viewing are the natural consequences. You boil things down to to preference and to power. And that is the entire obsession of this movement. Okay. However, sort of the antidote to this, because I thought about this a lot as I was preparing this sort of steel man. And then I wrote my rebuttal to my steel man. And I actually went to the Lord of the Rings for the great rebuttal of the woke worldview. And that is that if you frame the world as a constant battle for power so that you can get your preferences, it descends into hell. Kind of like how the ring of power, you have the, Gollum in his cave, like, oh, it's mine, my precious, I got the power. Everybody wants power. But what happens when you are the humble hobbits who love each other and you say, because we love each other, I'm willing to take the power that I could use to mold the world the way that I want it to be, and I'm going to cast it into the fire? It's the idea that Christ says, give all power to God, right? Surrender yourself to God. Okay? He has the power. And all we do is serve him and love one another, because there is truth. There is a transcendent order, a celestial order, as we would say, that we are trying to conform to, because I like to think of society and our vision of Zion like an orchestra. We all are different instruments. We're all different. But it's God who's trying to get us all to play music together. Now, to play music together doesn't mean do whatever you want. It's play your instrument and these musical notes, not because it's oppressive, but because this is how we make music. If you just go out there and do whatever you want and make noises with your instrument with everybody else around, it just creates chaos. There has to be a conductor who is guiding us into a way to play this music together to create something beautiful. And so these categories, these laws and principles that we're taught in the gospel are not oppressive. They teach us how to play music together with one another, not only individually, but also as societies. And I believe that this is manifest in reality, that the most successful societies are the ones that to whatever degree to which they embrace principles of the gospel.
Whether they're Christian or not.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Whether you're Christian or not, the degree to which you align with this transcendent order that I believe is being revealed through God's prophets is the degree to which you prosper. And so if we want to prosper, we need people to learn to play the music, not do whatever they want, because we're not God. God is God.
Yeah. And doing whatever you want is chaos. And it's chaos for yourself. It's chaos for others. And you need chaos, but you need chaos so that you can create order. And in that sense, we are creators, and we're supposed to be a creator like God. We're supposed to act like him in the sense that we can also move through chaos and actually create as we go. And so a symphony, right, is taking chaos, a bunch of random notes, and creating order out of it.
And not everyone is the same. You can express yourself. You can, within the bounds of what that instrument can do, you can do beautiful things. Yeah. But the radical notions, like you say, they lead to chaos. But then the other thing is you have the opposite extreme of too much order, to where it's like you're so restricted that you can't do anything that you want. But the principles of the gospel, just in our own lives, like we all know this. Yes, they restrict certain aspects, but those certain aspects are aspects that should be restricted, because when you restrict some aspects of your life, greater freedoms emerge on the other end. And so the path to true liberty is not radical liberation, but rather discipline. and discipleship. And the thing is we all sort of know that.
And aligning with truth. I mean, it is a matter of aligning with objective truth. And these movements are, they want to break that away. They want to break it down. They're viruses that try to break away objective truth. And when you do that, you go into chaos. I think, I'm trying to remember if it was you on one of our previous podcasts. Did you give an example of a baseball game and baseball players before? Yeah, same idea. You know, if you're a first baseman and you're out trying to play center field and someone makes a hit and it's like the shortstop throws it to first and there's nobody there, you know, it's like, wait a minute, play your role, you know, do your role and everybody can do this together.
And that's where identity comes from. Because the thing is that, remember, if you're telling me what I have to do, if my identity is like, you have to do something, a lot of people are like, that's oppressive. Well, is it oppressive to tell a first baseman that he needs to go stand on first base because we're playing baseball? But the thing is, if we put us all out on this field and it's like, hey, everybody, expressive individualism, you just do whatever you want, you won't have a game emerge. What you'll have is just a bunch of people running around, probably get frustrated. Whereas if you actually teach people to play the game, that means you're going to have to restrict some of the things that you want to do in order to play the game. And there's a question. What is the game that human beings are supposed to play? Or do we just get to invent whatever game we want and no game is any better or worse than any other? And for the postmodernists, it's sort of like there is no game. It's all just whatever we want to make it.
There's two games and we get to choose it. It is liberty or tyranny. And because eventually everything goes to one of those two areas. And liberation leads to tyranny. Liberty leads to disparity. There is disparity, and that's what the other side really hits hard on, but it also offers the opportunity for charity and for, you know, working together on that. And when we lack that charity and that disparity, then that's when liberty gets attacked pretty hard because that's its weakness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, frankly, my overall kind of to sum some of this up is just that I love what James says, big fan of his work. But the reality is, at least for me, as I sort of analyze this, I have to ask, well, if there is no God, if there is no transcendent order, then all that remains is power and preference. And the greatest power in this universe is society and biology, but can't really do much about my biology. So I guess I'll just focus on the society side of it. And then I guess if the world isn't the way that I want it, I should work to tear down the structures of power that prevent me from living my authentic life that I want to live according to my desires. And I just can't help but walk away from that and be like, that's a powerful argument, man. But it all changes the moment you say, no, there is a transcendent order. And as we sing in our church, there's a right way to live and be happy, right? And that changes the whole game. And so much rides on that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great discussion, Jacob. I'm glad we did this. Great idea. James does an amazing job of pulling all those original sources and pulling it together and articulating it. But it is an interesting question you bring up. It's like, well, wait a minute. Again, if you go back and look at the original sources and you add in Nietzsche and Mainlander and Roth and all these other guys that were part of that same German pathway, a philosophical pathway that Hegel and Marx and others are on, they're on the same path. God is dead. And it's a very good question. Maybe we'll be able to ask him that at some point.
Yeah. Well, James, if you ever watch this, I love you, man. Big fan of all that you do. Would love to have this discussion with you, or do it with Greg. He can quiz you on it. But I'd be really interested in hearing what you have to say about it. So
awesome. All right, Jacob. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Greg. Take care.